The draft blowing through the general's manor felt like ice-tempered barbs in the depths of winter, scraping against the face with raw, stinging pain. I stood quietly under the ornately carved and painted corridor of the main courtyard, listening to the waves of anguished wails and mournful weeping coming from inside the room, my heart still as water, unable to stir even a single ripple. A shout. Don't leave me behind. If you are gone, how will I and the child in my belly survive? In this general's manner, from top to bottom, who else could possibly tolerate us mother and child? I raised my hand, expressionlessly, and pushed open that heavy, carved rosewood door. The thick, suffocating bitterness of medicinal herbs mixed with the sickly sweet, cheap rouge and powder scent that perpetually clung to that woman rushed straight into my nostrils. Lu Xiao on the bed had long lost the peerless demeanor of the great Chinesedrama, victorious general. He was gaunt and haggard, his complexion ashen as earth, his chest wrapped in thick white gauze. That was from when he recklessly threw himself in front of his beloved treasure Meng, Qian amidst the chaos of battle, taking a fatal blow meant for her. How touching. This kind of life, and death devotion that only exists in storybooks, was enough to move one to tears. So moving that he even forgot it was the Shen family, whom he called reeking of money, that had emptied half their fortune, contributed money and grain, and even sold off their ancestral estates to keep his troops supplied when the court cut off their provisions in that desperate situation. Without me, Shen Qingying, Lu Xiao's bones would have long rotted in the desert sands at the border. Qingying, you've come! Lu Xiao heard footsteps and opened his eyes with difficulty. His hand was still clutching tightly onto Meng Qian's delicate, boneless little hand, but when his gaze fell upon me, those eyes, originally brimming with tenderness, instantly turned guarded, cold, and even carried a trace of barely perceptible disgust. I didn't step forward to wipe the cold sweat from his forehead as I used to, but instead stood still 3 steps away from the bedside, looking down at him as if he were a stranger. Does the general have any last words? While you still have strength, hurry up and say them. My tone was so steady it had not a ripple of emotion, and the corners of my eyes even curved up in the faintest smile. That coffin parked outside. I personally went to the best coffin shop in the capital to pick out the finest golden Nanmu wood for you. Even the preservative spices are the rare Western region incense that money can't buy. General, die with some dignity and don't waste the silver my Shen family spent. Lu Xiao's face twitched violently. He stared wide, eyed in disbelief, probably never expecting that his legitimate wife, who had been docile and submissive for the past 10 years, letting him knead and mold her at will, would say such icy and bone-chilling words at his deathbed. He gasped violently several times, took a deep breath, and forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart. Even at the final moment of his life, his tone still carried that condescending sense of bestowing charity. Qingying, I know you harbor resentment, but after I die, you must swear before the ancestral tablets that you will never make things difficult for Qin Qian and the child in her belly. As long as you use the Shen family's wealth to ensure their mother and child live a life of peace and prosperity. In the next life. He paused for a moment, a trace of arrogance showing in his eyes, as if bestowing upon me the greatest of favors. In the next life, I'll still grant you the position of the main wife. Let you continue to be the mistress of my Lu family household. Forever, unshakable. FFT. In this deathly silent and oppressive room, I ultimately couldn't hold it in and let out a soft laugh. That laughter grew louder and louder, finally turning into unstoppable mockery. The position of main wife? These 10 years, I used the Shen family's vast fortune to support him as he climbed from a poor ninth rank lieutenant all the way to a prestigious general. I set aside my dignity as a daughter of a wealthy family to serve him tea and water, day and night, attending to that ill-tempered mother-in-law, who constantly mistreated people. I managed all the sordid scheming throughout the entire household for him, socializing and currying favor for him in the circles of noble ladies in the capital. And even when he brought that mistress of unknown origin back to the residence, I had to swallow my broken teeth, put on an act of magnanimity and virtue, and personally arrange the ceremony for their entry into the household. I exhausted my youth, ruined my eyesight, and in the end, the compensation he gave me was to continue being his slave in the next life? Lu Xiao, you'd better save this tremendous blessing for your little sister Meng. I slowly bent down, looking at his face twisted in agony, and whispered mockingly in his ear. As for this lifetime, you can rest assured, the moment you draw your last breath, I'll sell off this general's residence along with all the furnishings inside. Without the Shen family's money to prop her up, without your protection, your little sister Meng probably won't even be able to live a decent life. Lu Xiao's eyes widened. A painful groan escaped from his throat, and his chest heaved violently. Overcome with rage and despair, he jerked his head back, coughing violently, as if the last bit of strength had been drained from him, and he fell heavily back onto the pillow. He never opened his eyes again. On that face, there was nothing but shock, unwillingness, and regret, and I quietly watched him take his last breath. No tears, no sorrow. I only felt that the mountain that had weighed on my heart for a full 10 years had finally collapsed with a thunderous crash at this moment. I was free. A violent dizziness suddenly struck, as if my soul had been pulled from my body and swept into a massive vortex. When I regained consciousness again, the strong, pungent smell of medicine at the tip of my nose had disappeared, replaced by a sweet and elegant peach blossom fragrance. I opened my eyes abruptly, gasping for air in large gulps. What met my eyes was the soft cloud-patterned crimson silk canopy, the sunlight outside the window blindingly bright, and as the breeze blew past, it brought a few clear bird calls. Miss Tode is the Shanxi festival, and we made plans with Miss Su from the Minister of Revenue's household to go on an outing to the western suburbs horsefield. Please take a look. Should we wear this red gold hairpin inlaid with rubies today, or that more plain mutton? Fat white jade hairpin? A clear and lively voice rang out beside my ear. I stiffly turned my head and saw Kui Chao, the maid who was selecting jewelry for me at the dressing table. She wore a water green spring shirt, her hair in double buns, her face youthful, exactly how she looked when I was 23. In my previous life, my Qiao had died early, trying to shield me from the bullying of cunning servants, secretly instigated by Meng Qian. I stumbled and crawled up from the canopy bed, rushing to that huge rhombus-patterned bronze mirror. The person in the mirror had a face like peach blossoms, skin surpassing snow, with a full head of black hair cascading like a waterfall over her shoulders. There were no fine lines at the corners of her eyes left by years of late nights and toil. No sallow complexion ravaged by time, and the resentment of being confined to the inner chambers. This was the 23-year-old Shen Qining, with clear eyes, a Shen Qining who knew nothing of the world's dangers. Me fingertips trembling uncontrollably, I touched my own warm cheeks, and tears instantly burst forth like a broken dam. I've come back. Heaven had shown mercy, actually allowing me to return to 10 years ago, back to when I was 23, to this day when all the tragedies and calamities had not yet begun. Qi Chao, what time is it now? I took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the tumultuous waves in my heart. Though my voice was somewhat tense, I tried my best to maintain composure. Qi Chao was startled by my sudden movement and hurriedly put down the hairpin, respectfully replying, "Miss, it is nearly the hour of the goat. We need to hurry. The peach blossoms in the western suburbs are blooming beautifully right now. If we go too late, I am afraid we won't get a good spot." Nearly the hour of the goat, going for an outing in the western suburbs. My eyes suddenly turned cold, a chill shooting straight from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. At this very moment in my past life, I encountered Lu Xiao on the small road leading to the horse grounds in the western suburbs. He was being hunted by his enemies and seriously injured. Back then, I was young and ignorant, overprotected since childhood, and was deceived by that righteous face of his that, despite being covered in blood, remained resolute. I thought I was like in the opera stories, saving a hero in distress who stood tall and upright. Little did I know, what I saved was an ungrateful wolf that could never be tamed, the beginning of my eternal damnation. Let's go to the western suburbs. I spoke coldly, casually picking the simplest wooden hairpin from the makeup box to pin up my hair, but not to the horse grounds. Tell the coachman to change route and go to the Broken Cliff Pavilion by the Peach Blossom Forest. The carriage swayed and bumped along the cobblestone road out of the city. Throughout the journey, my heart pounded like thunder, my palms covered in fine cold sweat. Although I deliberately changed the route, in order to bypass that unavoidable dense forest, the carriage still inevitably slowed down when passing through a fork in the road. A crisp clash of blades accompanied by desperate muffled groans drifted faintly from the wild grass nearby. Help! Save! Weak cries for help came intermittently. Sitting in the carriage, I stretched out my slightly trembling hand and gently lifted a corner of the curtain. In the muddy grass in the distance, a young man dressed in dark tight, fitting clothes was lying miserably on the ground. His clothes were tattered, his body covered with wounds of varying depths, and several black masked assassins were raising their gleaming long knives, closing in step by step. It was Lu Xiao. Compared to that sinister, calculating, hypocritical middle-aged man on his deathbed in my previous life, the current him, with sword, like brows and starry eyes, excellent bone structure, indeed had a bit of that youthful spirit that makes one's heart feel pity. Kui Chao also caught a glimpse through the gap, and frightened, covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Miss, look, there is someone injured over there. Looks like he is about to die. We brought so many guards. Should we have Adia and the others go save him?" Save him? I let out a cold laugh and mercilessly dropped the curtain. In my previous life, to save him, the two loyal servants by my side were beaten into lifelong cripples, and I myself was slashed on the back by an assassin during the chaos, leaving a scar that would never fade. At that time, Lu Xiao dragged his broken body and held me tightly in his arms, eyes red as he swore a poisonous oath, saying he would never fail to repay this life, saving grace of mine, Shen Qinging, in this lifetime. But what was the result? He stepped on the Shen family's bones and mountains of gold and silver to establish glorious military achievements at the border. He returned victorious, the entire city in an uproar. But the first gift he brought me was forcibly bringing back the pregnant Meng Qian under the pretext of a war orphan who must be taken care of. What I once thought was a match made in heaven was merely his stepping stone to cling to the powerful and suck blood to climb up. Miss, Kui Chao saw my face turn ice, cold, my eyes revealing a sharpness she had never seen before, and couldn't help but feel somewhat afraid and confused. No need to bother. My voice was cold and hard as frost, without a trace of compassion. An injured person appearing in such a desolate wilderness, drawing such vicious pursuit, must be someone whose right and wrong are hard to distinguish. Or Shen family is an honest merchant household with a clean reputation. What we most avoid is getting involved in these grudges and killings of the martial world. Tell the coachman to hurry up and leave here immediately. If anyone dares to meddle and disturb my mood, I'll have their hide carefully dealt with when we return to the estate. The coachman heard the severity in my tone and didn't dare slack off, immediately raising his whip. With a crisp crack, the horse felt the pain and the carriage sped away rapidly, leaving those sounds of killing far behind. I leaned comfortably against the soft pillow made of shoe brocade, closed my eyes to rest, and a relieved cold smile curved at the corners of my mouth. Lu Xiaoan, this lifetime, without my Shen family's miraculous elixirs given at any cost, without my Shen family's connections paving your way through official circles, I'd like to see if you, this so-called war god, can still crawl out of this desperate situation. Since I've been reborn, I absolutely cannot walk the same old path as my previous life. Relying on a man is not as good as relying on the mountains of gold and silver in my own hands. The first thing after returning to the city from the spring outing, I headed straight to father's study without even having time to change my clothes. The Shen family was the undisputed #1 merchant giant of Zhongyan in the Great Qi Kingdom. Also, in the hierarchy of scholars, farmers, artisans, and merchants, merchants' social status couldn't compare to those hereditary noble families. When it came to wealth and influence, even the lofty imperial family had to show the Shen family some respect during festivals and holidays. Qingying, didn't you have plans to go on a spring outing with Miss Su today? How come you are back so early? Is it too windy outside? Are you feeling unwell? Father was holding an abacus checking the account books. Seeing me rush in like a whirlwind, he immediately put down his work and looked at me with a beaming smile, his eyes full of affection. Looking at my father before me, still healthy with slightly graying temples, my nose suddenly stung and tears nearly burst from my eyes. In my previous life, father spared no expense supporting Lu Xiao in the war, and even more so to help me hold my head high in the general's manner. He didn't hesitate to scatter the wealth the Shen family had accumulated over generations. In the end, to cover up his crimes in the military, Lu Xiao actually turned around and bit back, pinning on father the enormous crime of colluding with foreign enemies and selling military supplies. My father, who had been proud all his life, had his home raided and was exiled, ultimately falling miserably ill on the exile road to that bitter cold land, never to return. Dad, I lifted my skirt. My knees went weak, and I heavily knelt down in the center of father's study. My eyes more determined than ever before. Father was startled by my sudden action and hurriedly got up to help me. Oh my dear daughter, what grievance have you suffered? Get up quickly. Tell Daddy, who dares to bully you? Father, I don't want to get married anymore. I want to follow you and learn to do business. I pushed away father's hand, straightened my spine, and looked at him with burning eyes. Father was stunned, his face full of disbelief. Do business? Nonsense. You are an unmarried young lady of a prestigious family. What would it look like for you to show your face in public later? Find a well-matched family with good background to marry into. Father will prepare a 10-mile bridal dowry for you. Even if I have to pave the road with gold bricks, I'll ensure you never worry about food and clothing for the rest of your life, living in wealth and luxury. Father, please hear me out. I took a deep breath and recounted the lessons learned through blood and tears from my past life. In this world, the most unreliable thing is the human heart, and the most changeable thing is a man's vow. Today he covets my dowry and obeys my every word. But if the Shen family declines tomorrow, how would I protect myself? Only real silver and skills held firmly in my own hands are the true foundation that belongs to me. I looked into father's shocked eyes and said word by word, I don't want to be a hothouse flower raised in the inner chambers, able only to cling to a big tree. I want to be a proud and resilient pine that can withstand wind, frost, rain, and snow, and hold up a piece of sky. If father trusts me, give me a shop to try my hand. If I can't produce results within 3 months, it won't be too late for me to obediently return to the back courtyard to do embroidery. Father was silent for a long time. He looked at the resolute determination in my eyes that only came from weathering many hardships, though extremely surprised at why his daughter's temperament had changed so drastically overnight. He ultimately doted on me and couldn't bear to go against my wishes. All right, father let out a long sigh, a flash of admiration in his eyes. Truly worthy of being my daughter. Shen Wanshan, you have backbone. I'll put you in charge of the Jingshu Pavilion silk shop in the most prosperous section of Zhuge Street in the capital. That shop has recently been suppressed badly by the Wang family's fabric store across the street and has been losing money year after year. If you can bring it back from the brink of death, I promise you that from then on, you can manage any of the Shen family's businesses as you see fit. On the first day of taking over Jingshu Pavilion, I didn't rush to examine the accounts. Instead, I swiftly and decisively carried out a sweeping reform. In my previous life at the General's Manor, in order to raise military funds for Lu Shaoyi, had secretly studied the capital's commercial ways quite a bit. I knew all too well the preferences of those high-ranking officials and nobles. First, I dismissed a group of managers and shop assistants who relied on their seniority and secretly took kickbacks. Then, I hired 10 top-tier embroiderers from Jiangyan at great expense and launched a private customization service unheard of in the capital at that time. We didn't just sell fabrics, we sold designs. I also created mystery box sachets as a bonus gift, and Yon, who spent over 100 taels of silver in the shop, would receive a sachet secretly made with Western region spices. In just half a month, the threshold of Jingshu Pavilion was nearly trampled through by the noble ladies and young misses of the capital. Sales had quintupled. Father looked at the account books, so excited he kept slapping his thighs, praising to everyone he met that he'd fathered a female Zhuge Liang. Just as my business was thriving and prospering, a piece of gossip made its way from tea houses in the streets and alleys into my ears. Did you hear? That young master from the Liu family who was attacked in the western suburbs, though he was rescued by a passing woodcutter and saved his life. Because he missed the best treatment window, his left leg is permanently disabled, and he'll never be able to walk properly again. Oh my, what a shame. He was originally planning to take this year's military examination. Now look what happened. Not only is the military exam out of the question, he can't even find a decent job. I sat in an elegant private room on the second floor of Jingshu Pavilion, sipping premium Rain Longjing tea, listening to Kui Chao's excited report, feeling an indescribable satisfaction welling up in my heart. The Liu family, that bottomless pit that had sucked 10 years of my life's blood, like a leech in my past life, was still just that impoverished household, living in a poor alley in the capital's outer cities, scraping by on a few meager acres of farmland, barely able to keep the pot on the stove. Miss, you don't know. That old Mrs. Liu is now as anxious as an ant on a hot pan, seeking doctors and medicine everywhere. I heard that to scrape together the consultation fee to invite the resident physician from the rejuvenation hall, she mortgaged the family's last ancestral home, and now the mother and son can only rent a leaky thatched cottage. Kui Chao covered her mouth and giggled, although she didn't know why I suddenly detested the Liu family so much. Seeing me happy, she also felt relieved. The good show has only just begun. I put down my teacup, looking at the bustling crowd outside the window, my gaze profound. Lu Shaoyin, your previous life you rose to success relying on my support. But in this life, I will personally watch you struggle bitterly in the mire, never to rise again. Just as I was planning the next step in my business layout, an extremely jarring commotion suddenly came from downstairs. Shen Qinging, you black-hearted woman, get your ass out here. A shrill, vulgar voice filled with a thick market atmosphere pierced through the first-floor hall of the Jingshu Pavilion. I frowned slightly and walked to the second-floor railing to look down. I saw an old woman, wearing a dark purple coarse cloth garment, with somewhat disheveled hair, leading a limping young man, ignoring the shop assistant's attempts to stop them, barging into the shop arrogantly. It was none other than Lu Shao and his mean-spirited, unreasonably troublesome mother. The mother-in-law who had tormented me to complete exhaustion in my past life. I leisurely straightened my priceless cloud brocade gown and descended the wooden staircase step by step. Lu Shao wore a blue robe that had been washed until it turned white, with the cuffs even worn through in places. His face was deathly pale, his cheeks gaunt and sunken. Those eyes that once brimmed with high spirits and ambition were now filled with bloodshot veins, full of gloom and unwillingness. He clutched a crude wooden crutch tightly under his right armpit, his entire body slightly hunched due to the disability in his left leg. The way he looked at me carried a strange sense of certainty, as if I were still that foolish woman who would throw herself at him and sacrifice everything for him, at the slightest show of weakness or the mere crook of his finger. Miss Shen. Lu Xiao spoke first, his voice extremely hoarse from prolonged illness and anger. That day in the western suburbs. Your carriage clearly passed by that grove. You clearly heard my cries for help. Why did you refuse to save me and let me die? Oh, so he has come here to demand an explanation? The distinguished officials and nobles who were selecting fabric all stopped to watch, and a crowd of common folk quickly gathered outside the Jingshu pavilion to see the excitement. When old Madame Lu saw the crowd was on her side, she immediately felt emboldened. She simply let her legs go weak, and with a thud, she plopped her butt down on the mirror, smooth marble floor of Jingshu pavilion, slapping her thighs with both hands as she began to throw a tantrum. Everyone come and see. Come and judge this for yourselves. This is the eldest daughter of the Shen family who claims to have a bodhisattva's heart, and acts all dignified and virtuous. That day when my son was risking his life in the outskirts escorting his mentor's documents, her carriage was right there nearby. Yet she was so heartless she wouldn't spare even a bottle of wound medicine or a single servant. She just let my poor son miss the chance for treatment and end up looking like this. Old Madame Lu wailed and carried on, snot and tears everywhere, her bony finger pointing straight at my nose as she cursed. Shen Qinging, you cold-hearted, conscienceless person who refuses to save the dying. You'll definitely get your comeuppance. Faced with this moral blackmail, Kui Chao behind me trembled with rage and was about to step forward to argue, but I gently raised my hand to stop her. Not only was I not angry, I elegantly descended the last step, calmly smoothed out the exquisite Suzhou embroidered ripple pattern on my sleeves, and looked down at the mother and son from above with calm eyes. Old Madame Louis, you can eat carelessly, but you can't speak carelessly. My voice was clear and crisp, with perfect diction, ensuring that everyone present could hear me loud and clear. First, when my carriage passed by that day, through the carriage curtain I only saw several masked assassins wielding long blades committing murder in broad daylight on the street. Shen Qinging, am merely a sheltered young woman without the strength to truss a chicken, accompanied only by a few rough servant girls and ordinary household servants. For me to protect my own safety and guard the lives of those under my care is perfectly natural human behavior. Old madam, do you mean to say that I should have forced those servants armed with brooms to fight desperately against assassins who kill without blinking, trading the lives of my Shen family's people for your son's life? Only then would I have a conscience. In this world, where is there any reason to force others to go die? The onlookers listening all nodded in agreement. Whose life isn't a life? When encountering Jianggu feuds and killings, staying far away is common sense. I looked at old Madame Lu's gradually stiffening expression, let out a cold laugh, then turned my head and shot my gaze toward Lu Xiao. Second. My voice suddenly turned cold, like frost in the dead of winter. Young Master Lu just said you clearly knew that was my carriage. If that is the case, you must have been extremely clear-headed at the time. Since you were clear-headed, and your injury could still support you walking to the capital, why didn't you go to the nearest capital prefecture office to beat the drum and cry out your grievance, seeking help from the authorities to capture the real culprit? Instead, half a month after the incident, you dragged that leg of yours here to my legitimate business establishment to make a huge scene? I stepped closer, my gaze sharp as a blade. Could it be that young Master Lu spent all his family's savings on medical treatment, and seeing that the Shen family has vast wealth, wants to use that leg of yours to publicly extort money from my Shen family? You are spouting complete nonsense. Lu Xiao's face instantly flushed bright red. I had hit his sore spot, and he trembled all over with anger. Old Lady Lu shrieked even louder. Who wants to extort your stinking money? My son is a well-read scholar, a martial arts prodigy since childhood. He is a future great general destined to be ennobled as a marquis and appointed as a minister. You've ruined his future. Great general, ennobled as a marquis and appointed as a minister? As if I'd heard the funniest joke in the world, I couldn't help but laugh scornfully. My gaze swept over Lu Xiao's injured leg propped up by a crutch, without any attempt to hide my contempt. Article 7 of Volume 3 of the Great Chi Code states it crystal clear: those with physical disabilities shall not be allowed to enlist as soldiers, nor shall they take the imperial examinations to pursue civil service. Young Master Lu, you can't even walk properly with that leg of yours, yet you still dream of charging into battle? In this lifetime, I am afraid you've long been cut off from any official career path. These words pierced precisely into the deepest, most festering wound in Lu Xiao's heart. In his previous life, he valued power as much as life itself, stopping at nothing to climb upward. Now, in front of all the people of the capital, I personally tore to shreds that laughable fig leaf of his, and trampled the ambition he took such pride in beneath my feet. Lu Xiao's face instantly turned from flushed red to deathly pale. He gripped that crude walking stick tightly, his knuckles turning white from the excessive force, his chest heaving violently. Shen Qinging, you don't need to be so cruel. He gritted his teeth, squeezing out these words from between them. Cruel! I walked toward him with light steps, taking advantage of the crowd's inattention. I leaned close to his ear and whispered in a voice only the two of us could hear. Lu Xiao, compared to all those things you did to my Shen family in your previous life, repaying kindness with enmity, what I am doing to you now is already more than merciful. This is merely collecting a bit of interest. Watching Lu Xiao's pupils suddenly contract in shock and confusion, I straightened up, resuming that noble and aloof appearance, and shouted loudly toward the door. Simone, these two are causing trouble in Jingshu Pavilion. Go to the capital magistrate's office immediately, and report this. My Shen family pays the imperial court over 1 million taels in taxes every year. At the magistrate's office, we still have some say. I want to see whether the laws of Great Qi can deal with such shameless troublemakers. Lu Xiao looked at the undisguised determination in my eyes, and inexplicably shivered. He suddenly realized that the Shen Qinging before him had completely changed. She was no longer that young girl who would blush and gaze at him with adoration, after stealing a glance at the banquet, but rather like someone who had returned from the abyss, specifically here to settle old scores with him. Mother, stop making a scene. Let's go, we're leaving. Lu Xiao didn't dare escalate the matter to the authorities. He pulled up old lady Lu, who was still throwing a tantrum on the ground, and limped out of Jingshu Pavilion under everyone's contemptuous gazes. The wretched figures of the two disappeared around the street corner. I watched the direction they left, took the warm handkerchief the young maid handed me with a pleased mood, wiped my hands, then casually instructed Kui Chao. Go send a few sharp servants to quietly pass word to the main rice shops, medicine halls, and clothing stores on Juke Street and in the outer city. From now on, as long as it is Lu family members coming to buy things, absolutely no credit allowed, and prices are to be doubled on the spot. If any merchant dares to help them out privately, they're making an enemy of the Jiangnan Shen family. After that, they can forget about getting even a penny's worth of goods from the Shen family. Since I wanted to settle things with my past life, I had to do it steadily and thoroughly, completely crushing any hope he had of making a comeback. When you read the part where Lu Xiao came to the door demanding answers with righteous indignation, didn't you find this man's thought process so absurd? It was suffocating. He was being hunted and seriously injured, and the people passing by didn't risk their lives to save him. So he thought, this was other people's fault. And Shen Qinging's 3-hit counterattack, logical questioning, exposing his motives, bringing up legal statutes, was textbook level crisis management. Days passed one by one. My Jingshu Pavilion business grew bigger and bigger, even catching the attention of noble figures in the palace. For the Empress's 1000 Autumn Festival gift, the Imperial Household Department specifically requested it be custom made at Jingshu Pavilion. Under my management, the Shen family's wealth multiplied like a snowball. Originally, I thought, since Lu Xiao had become a cripple with no hope for an official career, and I'd cut off his financial resources, This lifetime he could only waste away until old age in that dark rundown alley. But I still underestimated the kind of earth-shattering, transcending life and death-twisted fate between a scumbag and a white lotus. 3 months later one day, the informant secretly watching the Liu family came back to report to me. Liu Xiao had actually brought back a woman from outside. Supposedly, when he went to the foot of the mountain outside the city to dig up some cheap herbs to treat his leg injury, he rescued a pitiful woman with no one to rely on in a rundown temple. Meng Qian. Hearing this name, the vermilion brush I was using to check accounts paused slightly. Then the corners of my mouth curved into a bone, chillingly cold sneer. In my past life, Meng Qian was the orphaned daughter left behind by an old soldier who died protecting the army's grain supplies at the border in Liu Xiao's mouth when he returned victorious. Because of that fake orphan identity, she gained everyone's sympathy the moment she entered the door, standing on the moral high ground, forcing me to yield at every turn. And in this life, since Liu Xiao didn't go to the border, she became a pitiful filial daughter from a poor family with no one to rely on. Seems like no matter how time and space twist and turn, no matter how this so-called wheel of fate veers off course, some people's taste never changes. Meng Qian's act, all fragile and pitiful on the surface, but deep down scheming and insatiable, always hits the bullseye on Liu Xiao's pathetic and fragile macho protector complex, especially when Liu Xiao became a cripple and suffered everyone's cold stares. Those few tears of admiration from Meng Qian were practically his only comfort. But I know better than anyone what kind of greed flows in that woman Meng Qian's bones. In my past life, to climb up the ladder, to steal my household management rights, she could use every trick in the book to frame me. In this life following Liu Xiao, who is dirt poor and can't even feed himself, could she really be content guarding those few measly acres and that leaky thatched cottage, living that kind of bitter life with plain food and simple tea? Miss, you really are a fortune teller. That Meng Qian sure isn't someone who'll make things easy. Kui Chao brought me a bowl of chilled sour plum soup, smiling with her eyes crinkling, vividly imitating the gossip she'd gathered. From the first day she entered the Liu family's door, she had a huge falling out with Old Lady Liu. Old Lady Liu despised her for having unclear origins and not bringing a single penny of dowry, calling her a freeloader and money losing burden. As for that Meng Qian, she pretended to be gentle and weak at first, but within half a month showed her true colors. She complained that the Liu family was dirt poor, couldn't even have a decent meal, and every day smashed bowls and dishes, cursing Liu Xiao for being an incompetent good for nothing. I gently stirred the ice cubes in my bowl with a spoon, listening with great interest. Oh, this show at their house sounds quite interesting. How did Liu Xiao react? Liu Xiao, he is completely overwhelmed and suffering terribly right now. Kui Chao grew more excited as she spoke. That injured leg of his hurts like hell whenever it is rainy, requiring constant medication. But the family's income has completely dried up now. Even the money to buy rice comes from loan sharks. Meng Qian, relying on her looks, pesters Liu Xiao every day, forcing him to mortgage the Liu family's last 2 mu of poor farmland in the countryside, and the shabby courtyard they're living in, just to buy her some decent jewelry and rouge. Old Lady Liu refuses no matter what. And the mother, in-law and daughter-in-law quarrel loudly in the courtyard every day, hurling insults at each other, disturbing all the neighbors, and becoming the biggest joke in the entire outer city. I put down the porcelain bowl, a sharp glint flashing in my eyes. A poor couple grieves over everything. The ancients truly didn't deceive me. In my previous life, because my Shen family filled their lives with mountains of gold and silver, they naturally had the leisure to compose poetry and perform that act of lovingly adding fragrance by candlelight. Now, without the Shen family's support, that fig leaf disguised as true love has finally been torn to shreds by the reality of daily necessities. Since their family is making such a lively scene in this muddy pit, I stood up and walked to the window, looking at the prosperous world outside. Then, as an old acquaintance from my past life, I should also show great mercy and add more fuel to their fire. I immediately had my manager go to the marketplace to find someone. This person was named Qian Jin Duo, a slick operator who had been drifting through the underworld for years, extremely skilled at reading people and disguising his identity. He had a handsome and romantic appearance, and dressed in silks and satins with a few burly attendants by his side. He was the spitting image of a wealthy town merchant loaded with money and spending like water. I allocated Chen Jinduo a generous budget and had him dress up as a silk merchant from Jiangyan, frequently appearing near the rouge shops and pawn shops that Meng Qian would occasionally visit. A woman like Meng Qian has high ambitions but a paper-thin fate. Her deep-rooted vanity and greed for material things are her most fatal weakness. Now that Lu Xiao has become a cripple and can't satisfy any of her material desires, as long as someone dangles bait reeking of money, she naturally won't be able to resist. Sure enough, the plan went even more smoothly than I imagined. With Qian Jinduo's deliberate chivalrous intervention several times, settling Meng Qian's debts and paying for her rouge, plus a fierce offensive of gold and silver jewelry, in less than half a month, Meng Qian completely fell behind Lu Xiao and old Madame Lu's backs. She began frequently meeting privately with this free-spending boss Chan at tea houses, sending flirtatious glances, and I kept patiently waiting for the most perfect opportunity, an opportunity that could completely shatter Lu Xiao's pitiful self-respect. Half a month later, on a day of continuous rain, Lu Xiao's injured leg hurt unbearably, so he went with his crutch to the budget clinic in the east part of town to get medicine. I timed it perfectly. Had Qichao spend a few taels of broken silver to bribe a child doing odd jobs on the street. Following instructions, the child deliberately bumped into Lu Xiao, then pretended to accidentally slip a note with an address written on it into Lu Xiao's chest. The note had only one sentence written on it. If you want to know where your wife goes every day, come quickly to the third courtyard on Willow Tree Lane in the south part of town. That was a secluded villa that Qian Jinduo had specially rented for the convenience of meeting Meng Qian in secret. How could the suspicious, insecure, and extremely sensitive Lu Xiao possibly let go of such a clue? He couldn't even be bothered to get his medicine, and leaning on his crutch, he frantically rushed toward the south of the city through the muddy rain-soaked alley, limping with every step. At this moment, I was sitting in a private seat on the second floor of a tea house across from Willow Tree Alley, with the window half open, leisurely savoring the newly arrived tribute tea, quietly waiting for the good show that was about to unfold. Miss Lu Xiao has arrived. Qichao reminded me in a lowered voice. I looked down and saw Lu Xiao standing outside the gate of that small courtyard, soaked to the bone. The courtyard gate wasn't locked tight. It was left ajar. Across the short distance, combined with the silence of the alley after the rain, the sounds coming from the main room inside the courtyard pierced into Lu Xiao's ears with extreme clarity. Qian Lang, when exactly are you going to take me away? I really can't stay at that Lu family house for even one more day. That old lady finds fault with me every single day in different ways. And that Lu Xiao is even more of a useless good for nothing. This was Meng Qian's delicate voice, dripping with endless complaints and disdain. In her previous life, she had also used this kind of voice, so soft it could squeeze out water, leaning against Lu Xiao's chest, saying over and over, "Xiao is the most valiant and handsome. Sweetheart, don't be hasty. As long as you get the property deeds from that cripple's hands and exchange them for some travel money, we'll immediately hire a boat to go down to Jiangnan. Once we're in Jiangnan, I'll buy you a big mansion and hire over a dozen maids to serve you." Qian Jinduo's frivolous and dissolute teasing voice followed immediately after. "So disgusting," Meng Qian coquettishly scolded, her tone full of contempt for Lu Xiao. "You have no idea. That crippled leg of his acts up every rainy day, and his whole body becomes stinky and filthy. If I'd known he was such a useless waste who looks good, but serves no purpose. Back then in that ruined temple, I would have figured out my own way rather than come back with him to suffer like this." "Qian Lang, You must take me away. Outside the door, Lu Xiao stood rigidly in the rain, his face turning from purplish, blue to deathly pale, due to extreme rage and humiliation, the veins on his forehead bulging one by one. In his entire life, what he hated most was people bringing up his injured leg, and people looking down on him. He thought Meng Xian was the only woman in this world who didn't despise him and genuinely admired him. To protect her, he even went so far as to fall out with his own birth mother, but it turned out that the pure and flawless white moonlight in his heart was not only secretly having an affair with another man behind his back, but also using the most scathing language to trample his last shred of dignity beneath her feet. Lu Xiao let out a desperate, furious roar. He kicked open the half-closed courtyard gate with one fierce motion, raised the crutch that had been supporting his body, and charged into the main hall like a madman. Bang! The crutch smashed down hard on the 8 immortals table in the main hall, shattering the teapot and splashing tea everywhere. Lu Xiao's eyes were bloodshot. In an instant, the entire willow tree alley was filled with Meng Qian's screams, Lu Xiao's furious cursing, and the loud crashes of furniture being knocked over. Following my prior instructions, Qian Jinduo saw things were going south, and not only didn't help, but grabbed several banknotes from the table and escaped through the back window. Only that pair of star-crossed lovers who once loved each other deeply, but now wished they could devour each other alive, were left, fiercely confronting each other inside the room. Just as the chaos inside reached its peak, old Madame Lu, who had received word from the neighbors, arrived at the separate residence panting heavily, supported by 2 rough-handed servants. As soon as she entered, seeing Meng Qian's disheveled clothes and Lu Xiao nearly mad with rage, she instantly understood everything. You ungrateful thing, eating from my Lu family, drinking from my Lu family, yet you dare fool around with others outside, ruining my Lu family's reputation? I'll never let this go. Old Madame Lu erupted with astonishing momentum, shook off the servant's hands, grabbed Meng Qian's collar in a death grip, and the 2 of them scuffled together. Old hag, how dare you touch me? If your Lu family weren't so poor, you couldn't even afford to eat. Would I need to go begging others? You all deserve to rot in the mud for the rest of your lives. Meng Qian, pushed to desperation, had the fierce and vicious nature in her bones completely unleashed. She was never a decent person to begin with. She'd do anything to survive. She suddenly broke free from Old Lady Lu's grasp with force, all pretense torn away, and viciously shoved back with her hand. Old Lady Lu was already frail with age. Hit by this full-force shove, her feet stumbled violently, and her body fell backward uncontrollably, crashing heavily onto the courtyard's stone pavement. There was a dull thud as the old lady's head struck the hard stone slab, and she immediately lost consciousness. Mother! Lu Xiao's anguished cry pierced the sky. Although neighbors eventually heard the commotion and worked together to carry Old Lady Lu inside, managing to fetch a doctor who barely saved her life. The heavy impact to the back of her head, combined with her advanced age and the shock to her heart, caused her to suffer a stroke on the spot. After the doctor examined her, he shook his head helplessly. Though her life was saved, her entire body was now paralyzed, her face twisted, unable to speak a complete sentence. From then on, for 3 meals a day and all daily needs, she could only lie bedridden, requiring constant personal care. For the Lu family, already drowning in debt and destitute, this was undoubtedly the last straw that broke the camel's back. And Meng Qian, taking advantage of the chaos while everyone was frantically trying to save people, found the strength from somewhere, and actually slipped back to the Lu family's rundown courtyard, rummaged through boxes and cabinets, to find the deed to the Lu family's only remaining shabby house, and a few tales of broken silver, and fled the capital overnight with her bundle. She was overjoyed, thinking that as long as she found her Qian Lang outside the city, she could live a life of wealth and luxury. Little did she know, all of this was within my control. When she found Qian Jin Duo at the Pavilion 10 Li outside the city, covered in mud, What awaited her was not a warm embrace and a luxurious carriage to Jiangnan, but a cold IOU and several creditors with hostile glares. It turned out that all the gold, silver, and jewelry Qianjinduo had given her were borrowed with high-interest loans. Now that Qianjinduo had vanished into thin air, the creditors followed the trail to her door, and the meager deed and broken silver in Meng Qian's hands weren't even enough to pay the interest. In my previous life, she stood high above, torturing me to utter exhaustion in her capacity as the general's wife. In this life, she is being chased by creditors, with nowhere to run, forced to end up in some remote, poor, desolate place, scraping by doing laundry and mending for others. Those hands that were once carefully maintained, delicate and fair, are now covered with chilblains and calluses. She'll never have the chance to return to the capital again, never have the ability to stir up trouble again. This is the consequence of her scheming and biting the hand that fed her. As for Lu Xiao, who remained in the capital, his situation is more miserable than anything. Dragging along an injured leg, he not only has to face debt collectors blocking his door every day, but also take care of that paralyzed mother bedridden and completely unable to care for herself. Although old lady Lu can't speak, every day as soon as she sees Lu Xiao, those murky eyes of hers shoot out an extremely resentful and regretful light, her throat making muffled sounds as if blaming him for being blind enough to mess with that disaster Meng Qian, ruining the entire Lu family. From a high-spirited youth who fantasized about being ennobled and becoming a prime minister, reduced to such a state where he can't even guarantee basic food and clothing, Lu Xiao's spirit has completely collapsed. First of all, the female lead didn't directly hurt anyone. What she did was essentially putting the right people in the right places, letting the greedy Meng Qian meet an even greedier swindler, letting the hypocritical true love be exposed to reality. Flies don't land on eggs without cracks. If Meng Qian were really a good person, no amount of gold and silver could tempt her. But the most crucial point is, the brilliance of this part isn't about evildoers getting their comeuppance, but rather how, without the female lead's support, these people's true colors were completely exposed in the face of poverty. In the previous life, they composed poetry and enjoyed romantic companionship. That was because they had the Shen family's mountains of gold and silver backing them up. In this life, without the ATM, what true love, what filial piety, what loyalty, all were beaten back to their original forms by the daily necessities of life. In the depths of winter, when Lu Xiao was at his most destitute, most down, and out, already worn ragged by life, I finally appeared once more in that dark, damp alley. It was the coldest heavy snow day of the year. Goose, feather snowflakes drifted down in profusion, adorning the entire capital in silver. I sat in a luxurious carriage made of fine red sandalwood, lined with warm fox fur cushions, slowly entering that muddy, wretched alley. Kui Chao held up the oiled paper umbrella and gently lifted a corner of the sedan curtain, allowing me to see clearly what Lu Xiao looked like now. He was curled up on the threshold of a dilapidated temple, with wind blowing through from all sides. His hair was messy like weeds, and that blue robe that used to be washed until faded was now tattered and torn, unable to block the bone, chilling cold wind at all. His whole body was purple from the cold, and in his hands he tightly clutched half a cold steamed bun, frozen rock, hard picked up from who knows where. Seeing the carriage that represented noble status stop before him, Lu Xiao slowly raised his head. When he looked through the lifted curtain and clearly saw Shen Qinging sitting inside, draped in an expensive snow fox cloak, noble and dignified, a glimmer of extremely eager, almost crazed hope suddenly burst forth in his eyes that had been dead as ashes, like a final spark of life. Qinging, is that you? Qinging, you came to get me, didn't you? He threw away the cold steamed bun in his hand, didn't even bother to grab his crutch, and dragged his crippled leg, desperately crawling forward in the snow. He tried to reach out with those hands covered in mud and frostbite to grab the tassels hanging from my carriage. You still care about me. You used to care so much about me. You'd even risk your life. Everything you've done. Opening the fabric shop. Targeting me. It is all just because you are angry at me, trying to get my attention, isn't it? He cried out, tears streaming down his face, looking utterly pathetic and pitiful. I frowned, my eyes cold as ice. I didn't speak, just calmly took a step back, avoiding his outstretched hands. Lu Xiao. I looked at him shivering in the snow, finally opening my mouth slowly, my voice soft as if afraid to shatter the falling snow, yet carrying a bone, chilling coldness. Do you remember what the last words you said to me before you died were? Lu Xiao froze. He looked up at me blankly, completely unable to comprehend this question that spanned 2 lifetimes. You said, Qinging, in the next life, I'll grant you the position of main wife again. I curved my lips into a resolute, cold smile, enunciating each word, each one piercing his heart. I am telling you right now, loud and clear, in this lifetime your position of main wife, even the most ordinary maid in the Shen family, wouldn't give it a second glance. The instant he heard those words, Lu Xiao's pupils contracted and dilated violently. Although he didn't understand the entanglement between past and present lives, that phrase, grant you the position of main wife in the next life, was like an invisible dull blade, ruthlessly piercing through what little self-respect he had left, completely crushing his unrealistic fantasies. He finally understood that the Shen Qinging who had eyes only for him, who was willing to give him everything, she was long gone. The current Shen Qinging is a lofty guest above the clouds, while he is just a person completely abandoned by fate. You just stay here and look after your paralyzed mother. Stay with that leg you crippled yourself through your own arrogance. And slowly, bit by bit, waste away the rest of your life in endless regret and hardship. This is the consequence of your own actions. I lowered the sedan curtain, shutting out that face for which I no longer held even half a thread of attachment. Quichao, have the coachman turn around. Father has reserved a private room at the first restaurant under heaven, and is waiting for me to verify several major accounts from this winter. The carriage slowly turned around in the snow, its wheel tracks mercilessly crushing over the traces Lu Xiao had just crawled through. From behind came Lu Xiao's utterly desperate cries, echoing endlessly in the cold wind and snow. After that winter of heavy snowfall, Lu Xiao completely disappeared from the capital. Some said he moved with his paralyzed mother to a desolate village outside the city. Others said he had become a beggar begging on the streets. In any case, no one ever saw any trace of him in any street or alley of the capital again. That young man who once dreamed of becoming a marquis and prime minister was ultimately devoured completely by fate and his own greed, without even making a single ripple. This is the consequence of his humiliating my Shen family and being ungrateful. 5 years later, time flies and the Da Qi era name has changed to a new one. And I, Shen Qinging, am no longer the sheltered young lady who would only grieve over romance and be confined to inner courtyard scheming. With the knowledge from 2 lifetimes, decisive methods, and the Shen family's original abundant wealth, I expanded the Shen family's commercial empire from Jiangnan all the way to every corner of Dachi, silk, tea, salt, and iron banks. Wherever there are people, there are Shen family businesses. Even the grain and logistics for the court's northern desert expedition are entirely handled by my Shen family. The current emperor, grateful for the Shen family's tremendous contributions in disaster relief and military supplies, made an exception to issue an imperial decree, personally bestowing upon me the title of Dachi's first female merchant magnate, granting me a gold medallion and command arrow, with authority to rank 1 level above officials. With the mountains of gold and silver I earned, I built bridges and paved roads across the nation, established charity schools specifically to take in homeless girls, teaching them to read, do accounting, practice needlework, and even learn the ways of commerce. I want all the women in this world to know that a woman's life is absolutely not limited to just marriage and childbearing. When common people across the land mention Master Shen, they all express gratitude and give a thumbs up. It was a spring day when grass grew and orioles flew. I stood on the highest slope of the western suburb horse grounds, the breeze brushing past my skirt. Before my eyes, the magnificent and boundless beautiful landscape. Someone once asked me curiously, "Master Shen, you are now wealthy enough to rival a nation? With beauty that could topple kingdoms, having built such a great enterprise? Don't you want to find a good man of equal standing to entrust your life to, so you'd have someone to rely on?" Hearing this question, I turned my head, looking at the picturesque landscape in the distance, and laughed with both contentment and dominance. Entrust my life? I stretched out my hand, pointing at this vast territory and prosperous era. Look at this flourishing realm, this kingdom's worth of wealth, this freedom to never have to read anyone's expression or be bound by anything. Which of these things in this world isn't more worthy of trust than those ethereal promises? As for Shi Yuan, that cold-faced war god, who, in my previous life, ended Lu Shao's life on the battlefield. In this life, we didn't play out some click-fade drama of repaying a life, saving debt with devotion. We became the most compatible and powerful business partners and confidants in this world. He guards the frontier, commanding heavy troops, using his sharp sword to protect Daqi's century of peace. While I reside far from the court, wielding the abacus, controlling Daqi's economic lifeline, providing the most solid backing for his thousands of troops and 10,000 horses. We occasionally drink together on the top floor of the capital's tallest tavern. No romance, no sentimental attachments. We only discuss the world's situation, the people's hardships, and future grand ambitions. Me life is already full enough that it doesn't need any love to fill it. I never dreamed again of that cold and oppressive general's manner from my past life. Never dreamed again of Meng Qian's hypocritical face, and never dreamed again of those nauseating vows of the next life. In this life, I completely tore up the script that others had forced upon me. I am no longer a stepping stone for anyone to climb to power and wealth. Nor am I anyone's appendage. My own life is ruled by myself. I, Shen Qinging, have finally lived in this vast world as my own radiant self. Honestly, I read this story 3 times from start to finish. The first time I got goosebumps all over. It was so satisfying. The second time I noticed many details. The more I savored it, the better it tasted. After finishing the third time, I actually felt like crying. Not crying for Lu Shao, but crying for Shen Qinging. Think about it. What did she give in her past life? Her entire youth, all her family fortune, her father's life, her maid Kui Chao's life, that scar on her back that could never fade for the rest of her life. She used everything to love someone, and the final reward she got was in the next life. I'll still give you the position of main wife, meaning continue to work like a slave for me. So everything she did in this life, rather than calling it revenge, it is better to say, she finally learned to love herself. Not saving the scumbag is because she finally understood that her own life is worth more than anyone's gratitude. She pursued her career because she finally understood that mountains you lean on will fall. People you rely on will run away. Only silver and skills won't let you down. In the end, she chose not to marry. Not because her heart was broken, so she stopped believing in love. But because her life was already spectacular enough that she didn't need anyone to define her value. And that relationship between her and Shi Yuan was truly the most bittersweet yet most brilliant setup in the entire story. 2 people standing at the peak of their respective fields, appreciating each other, trusting each other, helping each other succeed, but neither needing the other to save them. That is what true equals meeting at the summit really looks like. All right, end of rambling. Finally, it is voting time. Which ending setup from this story do you like best? A Shen Qinging becomes wealthy enough to rival nations, granted the title Female Heroic Merchant. Living as the ultimate woman, Bi Lu Shao and Meng Qian each meet miserable fates, reaping what they sowed. So satisfying. C. Shen Qinging establishes charity schools to help girls, breaking the destiny of women being dependent. Di Shen Qinging and Shi Yuan become close confidants, plus business partners. Without cliché romance Shen Qingying frankly states a prosperous kingdom is more worthy of trust than illusory promises. Clear-headed and independent. I personally must choose C&E. Because a true girl boss doesn't just stand up herself, but also helps more people stand up. Which one would you choose? Drop your answer in the comments and chat. See you in the next story.